Hello, and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today, I'll be showing you how to cycle from Gospel Oak in North London to Kennington in South London. This ride takes about 40 minutes, and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey also takes around 40 minutes, but requires a change of line or a long walk, so cycling is a great option to make this journey. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to everyone who supports the channel on our Patreon page. If you'd like to contribute as well, then you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting outside Gospel Oak Station and we're going to duck straight into Oak Village. I love the little apartment blocks on the left there, recently built, and they were designed by one of my favourite architects, Peter Barber. As we turn left into Grafton Road, just note the little blue signs which sent us this way. Those used to point the wrong way, but they now point the right way after I flagged it up in an earlier video. It's a small thing, but it's really nice to see. One change to this route since we last came this way is this improved pedestrian crossing here. It looks like a nice design and should help make the whole area just a bit more livable. For our purposes though, this filter which we're passing through now is the most important thing on Grafton Road. This was installed a couple of years ago as a trial and has now been made permanent, and the effect has been to really quieten down this street and to turn it into a really nice cycleway with very little in the way of traffic. Combined with two other closures on nearby Queen's Crescent and Raglan Street, as well as a timed school street, which is a timed closure during school pickup and drop-off hours, effectively peak time for driving commuting, the whole area has basically been turned into a low traffic neighbourhood. The borough we're in, Camden, has been a little bit slower at rolling out LTNs compared to boroughs like Lambeth or Islington or Hackney, but this is a really good one, and if they can replicate this model elsewhere in the borough, I think that they'll be onto a winner. One area where Camden really excels compared to other boroughs is in rolling out protected cycle lanes. For a big chunk of this journey, starting in a moment, we're going to be mostly riding on protected lanes that have been put in by Camden. We're then going to pick a quiet route through back streets to the River Thames, then use the protected cycleways along the River Thames, and then pick another back street route through the northern part of Lambeth until we get to Kennington. Today's route is a reasonably long one and cuts all the way from North London through to inner South London, and I think it's a great example of how cycling infrastructure in inner London has really improved. We're basically going to be cutting across the very centre of the capital, and we're going to be doing it with the greatest of ease. There really aren't many spots that we'll be going through where I would be worried at all, and I think pretty much anyone could cycle this route. At the moment we're cycling on these stepped cycle tracks on Royal College Street. Unfortunately our way was slightly blocked here, but it seems like it was for a good cause, which was trimming a tree. Those step tracks are interesting. You can see they're raised up from the main carriageway by a step, which is why they have that name. Compared to this section just coming up here on the right, where the cycle lane is at the carriageway level but protected by a protective concrete island or light protection in some cases. Now, what I didn't realise until recently was that stepped cycle tracks where the carriageway is raised up are actually more expensive to build than traditional protection. The reason for that is apparently because when you raise the level of the carriageway to build a step track, you also have to do things like raise the utility shafts at the same time. So things like telecoms covers, drains, these all have to be moved up, and you can see we passed a good fair few of these. So all that work can actually get a bit fiddly, and it can all mount up and get a little bit pricey. This means that boroughs tend to only build step tracks when they need their advantages, and the big advantage of step tracks is that they are a little bit narrow and easier to fit in than standard segregation, so you can put them on a narrower road where there isn't necessarily as much space for a traditional protective barrier, you get a higher usable width. If you want to see a good example of a step track to see what I'm talking about, you can see one here now. Each one of these drain covers that we pass would have had to have been raised up when they were constructed. By contrast, the cheapest form of segregated cycle lane is wand protection, and that's probably why we're seeing so much of it in London, where TfL doesn't have very much money at the moment, and they're able to roll out protected lanes kind of at speed, maybe not as fast as we'd like, but they've made a lot of progress and doing it on a limited budget. It's time to do a bit of sightseeing. On the right is the Francis Crick Institute, which is the biggest biomedical research facility in Europe. On the left is St Pancras Station, which is the London terminus of the Midland Railway, which sends trains up to Sheffield, Nottingham and other cities. You can also get the Eurostar from there to Paris, Amsterdam and Brussels. On the right is the British Library, one of the largest libraries in the world, and the UK's copyright library, which gets a copy of every book published in the country. They also put on some really interesting exhibitions. At the time of recording, there is an exhibition there about fantasy novels. Haven't been yet, but I intend to check it out because they're usually pretty good. The street that we're on now, Judd Street, is very quiet as it's closed with the junction at Euston Road that we came in. We're going to bear right into Lee Street here and then turn left onto Marchmont Street and right onto Tavistock Place, where we'll find cycle lanes again. This might seem a little bit complicated to anyone who knows the area well. You could just keep going straight down Judd Street and turn on to Tavistock Place, but the reason I've done it like this is that you're technically not allowed to turn right from Judd Street onto Tavistock Place. And also, going from Marchmont Street is a much more comfortable turn anyway. Tavistock Place does have protected cycle lanes on it, although there's quite a lot of building work and development going along on this street, so sometimes the protection is removed. I think to make space for HGVs, scaffolding, that kind of thing. That shouldn't be a permanent situation, but generally it's pretty comfortable to ride on as it is anyway. Also, if you look up ahead here, you'll see a work crew hard at work. They're actually in the process of installing new protection on these cycle lanes. You can see these brand new concrete sleepers that have been put into the road, which I think are much more substantial and also just generally a little bit better looking than what was there before. I think they've been working their way from Gower Street backwards in the direction that we just came, so they'll probably get as far as Judd Street, I think. One interesting point to make, given the discussion we had earlier about stepped cycle tracks, is that I believe Camden actually consulted on putting stepped cycle tracks like the ones we're currently on down Tavistock Place. But in the end they seem to have gone for that concrete sleeper protection, so I do wonder whether or not they just looked at it and said, well, we can get better or just as good protection for less cost by just using these concrete sleepers than if we'd done the step tracks. I don't know for sure, but it's a guess, and if anyone has a better idea, let me know in the comments below. These cycle lanes along Gower Street are pretty good. As you can see, there are some bits that do lack protection, and although it generally feels pretty safe, it would be better to see the protection extended a bit. I think it does sometimes feel a little bit open, although there are usually so many cyclists on here that it's not so bad. There are a couple of downsides to it. There are actually a couple of loading bays in the cycle track, and when they're used, you often have to go out onto the road to get around a parked vehicle. It's not a great design, and it's obviously a compromise that the council has done there to keep front door loading access to some buildings while having the tracks in on what is a relatively narrow street. You also just want to keep an eye out on the junctions on this street, as cars do have a tendency to turn across people who are cycling. I've seen quite a few near misses here, and I wouldn't want anyone watching this video to be one of them. It would also be great to just see some wand segregation even added to the cycle lane approaching this bike box here, as it can feel a little bit exposed when traffic's heavier. Now do pay close attention to the way that I crossed High Holborn there, as it is a little bit confusing. It's kind of counterintuitive. You have to go left and then do a hard right into Endell Street to get there. This section of the route on Endell Street and Bow Street is probably the weakest section, I think. As you can see, there are only a few cars around because only a few people at any one time think that that's a good way to get around streets like this, a stone's throw from Covent Garden. But it does only take a few to make the whole thing feel a little bit chaotic. One dynamic that I have noticed is that because there are 3 zebra crossings which are all in heavy use quite close to one another along this stretch of street, you do tend to end up with quite long queues of cars here, even though there aren't actually that many cars per hour passing through, because they all have to wait at the zebra crossing. Honestly, I think it would probably make sense just to pedestrianise this whole area, because even with the wide pavements and the zebra crossings, there's just not enough space for all the people who want to walk around here. At the very least, it should be filtered to remove through traffic from it, I think. Although Wellington Street is closed at that point that we just cycled through, there are still a few through routes through that area, and quite a lot of drivers use them to cut through around the West End. It's not an ideal cycle route, but unfortunately it's a really useful way to get from those protected lanes on Gower Street to this protected lane here, cycleway 3, on the embankment of the River Thames. You can see we use that Savoy Street cut through, and that is, I think, probably the quickest way and still a fairly comfortable way to link between those 2 stretches of protected lane. That cycle link also works in the opposite direction when you're cycling up Savoy Street, so if you've ever wanted to know how to connect those 2 little bits of protected lane, that's the way to do it, and I think it works out pretty nicely in practice. Just do watch out for traffic and expect frustration on Endell Street and Bow Street because they're not fantastic. Now, note the construction work on the left and the right there. That is part of the Thames Tideway project, or the so-called super sewer for London. And we'll be getting some new public space and a redesigned cycle lane there this year. When that's finished, I will come past and I will show it to you and give you my thoughts on it. In the meantime though, as we approach Big Ben, do watch out for social media influencers fluttering into the road as they are a hazard. Maybe we need some sort of bespoke street sign here just to warn people about that, as it is a very common occurrence. Unfortunately, there's no relief on the tourists standing in the cycle lane front as we turn left onto Westminster Bridge. In fact, it does get worse. These pavements are dangerously overcrowded. As you can see, this is probably the worst I've seen it actually, but it's not too different from what you might often see when you come down here. Honestly, I've been told of a lot of people who are simply choosing to ride in the bus lane because these cycle lanes are getting kind of unusable, and it's really not great and kind of unsafe, both for people riding and also for people walking on there. There's also those ice cream vans and pedicabs which park in the bus lane and make it also not a particularly great option. There's actually a dedicated police operation to try and shift that ice cream van, but they don't seem to have been successful so far. I guess we'll see if they make any progress. At the very least, I think that those pavements should be significantly wider, and I think there's probably a good case for pedestrianising Westminster Bridge as well, just given how many people there are. That's one of the world's most popular tourist attractions, and everyone who wants to see it is crammed onto the pavements and stepping out into the cycle lane. It's not a good situation for anybody to be in, really. Obviously, whatever solution is found would have to be a good one for the buses that use that route as well, including buses serving St Thomas's Hospital, which are really important. So it's not a straightforward question, but I don't think the current setup there is really working at all. Now, we're going to pick a quiet backstreet route through North Lambeth to get to Kennington, and just a reminder that if you need a bit of help with wayfinding here, you can always download a map of the route in a GPX file and use it on whatever app or device you use. It's a standard format, and you can find a link to that in the description below the video. While you're there, make sure you give the video a like, as it does help boost it in the YouTube algorithm and help other people find it. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, do just make sure you hit that subscribe button, as it is free, and all it does is make sure that my videos appear on your YouTube homepage more often so you don't miss videos. I try and post new ones every week. I also just want to say a massive thank you to all viewers who support the channel on Patreon. You are awesome. If you like the work the channel is doing and you're feeling particularly generous, then you can find a link to the Patreon page in the description as well, where you can chuck us a few quid to keep the channel going. Thanks again to all of those of you who do that already. Now, people have been asking me to tell them roughly when these videos were recorded. I believe this one was recorded in December on a Friday, although I have to admit I didn't have the time on my camera set properly, so I can't tell you exactly. But yeah, it's certainly a winter weekday afternoon, if that's helpful. I know people like to know that so they can judge what the traffic is going to be like when they do their journey. And I can say that I think most of the traffic you've seen on this video is fairly typical. We're either in low traffic neighbourhoods which are quiet all the time, or we're on protected lanes. And yeah, you won't see any more traffic on streets like this, certainly. The only bit that does get a bit busier is the Endell Street, Bow Street section, which I think gets quite a bit busier around sort of theatre time or time when people are going out for drinks in the evening. There can be a lot more pedestrians and a lot more cabs around there, so do watch out for that little bit. But paradoxically, it's probably actually a little bit better at commuting times in the morning, which is unusual for London, but I've had pretty good experiences down there around that time of day. Now, we've made it to Kennington Cross, so this is where we're going to end the video. Do let me know in the comments what you think of that. I think it's a pretty good route and really showcases a really decent north-south corridor that we've now got running all the way from Gospel Oak down to South London. And frankly, you can go further south. You can cross here and we could go all the way to Peckham if we wanted to. I'll definitely have more videos heading that way in the future, so make sure you hit subscribe to see those. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to hearing from all of you in the comments as usual. See you again next time.